So, Mrs. Healey, I'm so honored to meet you and also a great pleasure to introduce you to the Romanian public. Today, we shall talk about your book, The Art of Being Alone. And I must say, such a title seems perfect for the period of time we've been through for some years by now. And many of us really thought, if it really possible, is it really possible to feel happy with only our own company? So I heard that you got inspired for this book from the Honjok tribes. Did I pronounce it right?
You did, Honjok.
That's great, because my English is not my mother tongue, so it will be a little bit stressful for me, but I hope everything will be fine in the end. So you got inspired from their lifestyle. So what makes them different? What made you get inspired by this lifestyle and decided to write this book?
Well, I was approached by a publisher in the United Kingdom who was interested in a psychotherapist insight on the Honjok, and wanted to hear from me about, what's the difference between loneliness and being alone, and to explore more deeply the flavor and the depth of the spirit of the Honjok. And what I discovered as I interviewed people in South Korea who live a Honjok life, because I wanted to hear from them directly what it was like and not just what I had researched. And I also interviewed people from around the world who live a Honjok life. And a Honjok life, when you break it down, Hong is short for Honja, and that means alone. And the Jok is tribe of one. And that is a concept that I have been working with in my private practice about getting comfortable with being a tribe of one. And that's why it really interested me to hear that this was an emerging trend in South Korea, particularly given South Korea's collectivist societal pressures, and that this was highly unusual. And what happened was that in 2017, there was this counterculture buzzword going around when these droves of young Koreans started to use Honjok as a hashtag to describe themselves and their activities. And it started to get a following. And I think in particular, the reason it started to get a following is because of the values that South Korea holds dear in terms of their history, in terms of kind of focus on the community in contrast to individualistic values.
So it's a new trend, it's a new way of living, or it was before and they just adapted to the modern lifestyle?
It seems to, in my research, it seemed to be a newer trend. Mm. And there's immense societal pressures in South Korea. And given all the societal pressures, there were people that ended up living a Honjok life by circumstance and started to embrace it rather than feeling like there was something wrong with themselves. They said, I'm going to embrace this.
So it's a new trend. Some people start living. Okay, it was due to the pressure they lived in their society. We might say we live under pressure nowadays. So we might think how it would be just to read this book and maybe find a new way of living a new lifestyle. But we will still question ourselves. What is the difference between being alone and being lonely? Is it not the same thing? I understand.
It's a very good question. And I often work with people, and this is another reason I was interested in this topic, was because I work with people who feel lonely in their lives. And it's actually, and you probably know about this, a mental health, it's a mental health crisis. And particularly in these times that we live in, the crisis of being lonely. And the gift of the Honjok is that you can live alone or be alone and not be lonely, and enjoy your own company and have the time and the space to explore more deeply the connection with your true self. And that is the invitation. And it's building a sense of self-acceptance. It's building a connection to your inner world. And when you're lonely, you often feel a lack of connection and emptiness, in contrast to being alone, where you can feel fulfilled and you can feel connection. So there is a big difference. And that's something that I'm really interested in with the Honjok.
Do people come and ask you how can they pass from this feeling of being lonely to being alone and feeling all right with this? Because, if you think of psychology and psychotherapy in general, this is what most of the psychologists are preaching: to love yourself, be in peace with yourself,
yes.
Be happy with yourself, even if, I don't know, you have a certain period of time when you are on your own and you can be the best company of yourself. So are people, after reading your book, coming to you and say, okay, I got the idea, being alone is different than being lonely, but how am I going to do it?
Yeah, that's a very good question, because it sounds good in theory. And how do you apply that in your daily life? When there may be you may have a life that in which you're lonely, but you have a lot of distractions. You see, as human beings, we can start to distract ourselves when we feel the sense of loneliness from really being with ourselves. So what I recommend is that we start to incrementally build tolerance for being with ourselves without distractions. I'd like to begin with questions like what gives you meaning? What inspires you? Get curious. Start with a curious lens. Is there something that I've been putting off, that I've been wanting to do, but I've been too distracted to do it? Begin now. Start a little practice, even if it's a few minutes a day, of being with yourself without any distractions. That means your phone, the TV, even a book. And over time, you start to cultivate more of a sense of your edges, more of a sense of yourself. And to me, this is a platform for also building our innate worth. You may find that it leads to activities like, I always wanted to do a dance or some sort of movement activity or soulful activities with oneself, walking alone, maybe in nature, doing things alone that engage other parts of oneself, cultivates another way of being in this world. And that's what I discovered with people who I interviewed who live a Honjok life. They discovered themselves and they found a sense of peace, but they had to build it incrementally over time, build their tolerance without distractions to come back home to who they really are.
So you cannot just do it from one day to another. You just have to do it slowly, maybe 5 minutes every day. And slowly, you will get to really live in a Honjok lifestyle. But I'm asking you, and I think most of the people would ask themselves, okay, you decided today, let's say, let give it a try. Let us give it a try.
Right.
And I'll do it for 5 minutes a day, maybe 10 minutes next, and so on. What do you think would be the easiest and the hardest thing when you're just a beginner? You're in the beginning. You just want to just, let's say, try it, not exactly do it. You just want to try it to see if you can do it later on or not. What would be the easiest thing, the thing that you will find so easy to do? And what would be the hardest thing that would make you say, maybe not for me? And how you overcome them?
Yeah, I think I guess I'll start with the hardest thing is this sense of discomfort and unease with being in solitude, and this desire to distract, because sometimes things get stirred in us that we don't want to look at. It could be despair, particularly in these times, I've noticed despair, grief, helplessness, and hopelessness. So we can get flooded with some emotions that can feel unbearable in the moment, and where we want to go grab something or numb ourselves. So that can be the hardest thing, is to still stay with it, be with it with great compassion and curiosity. What are you showing me? What's that feeling showing me? But when we're not practiced at that, it can feel intolerable. That's why I recommend doing it slowly, incrementally, because what you discover is that when you stay with it, more is revealed, and that what you're most scared of doesn't destroy you. It strengthens and deepens and evolves you. The other part of the question had to do what's the easiest part. And the easiest part is the place where there's you can get this sense of accomplishment, or a sense of rest, a sense of this is possible, that where you can feel a little bit of space and kind of start to feel even the rise and the fall of your breath, and feel your senses again. And that part can really hold you. So that's the part that can feel like it's for me, and I matter, and that nourishes me. So that's a little easier, because you're doing something to take up time that has a long-term benefit.
So my next question would be, can anyone do that? Or if you already have a family, or in a very big group of people, is there an optimal, time to start this way of life only when you're alone, or when you have I don't know. Is there a rule to get this lifestyle started?
So, I want to say that some of the loneliest people who I've worked with are the ones who are not alone. Like, in terms of they might be surrounded by people, or in a very rich family, have a very rich family life, and have an internal sense of being lonely. And so there is not an optimal time. You can start any time. And the thing is, you have to start prioritizing yourself. So when you are in a family and there are competing demands, and you feel like there's no time for oneself, you get to start to take up space. And even if it's in your bathroom, and you set boundaries, to give me, this is, my time. And you establish that among your family members, and you build it so that you're actually, in a way, you're showing your family how to treat you, and they are witnessing you taking up space. So it might mean that you go out and walk, might walk alone. You develop creative ways to weave it into your busy life. And it doesn't matter if you're young, middle age, or in later years. It's always the right time to start, and it's never too late. But you've got to decide that you matter, because there will always be competing priorities.
Yes, of course. And this can be a model for the other members of the family.
Yes.
I mean, you could take your 5 minutes, let's say in the beginning, so they will start taking their 5 minutes, and everyone will get a good company of themselves.
Yes. And I particularly like this, to model this to children, that their parents are taking up space and broadcasting this, so that as the children age, they do the same for themselves. This is about including oneself, even when you have competing demands. And the impact on children over time to witness this, I believe, is profound. It's another way of being. It's a way to cultivate our inner world in contrast to just the identity of our outer world where there's outer pressures. The Honjok life is a way in which to say I matter. It's not just about how other people see me or what the expectations are. It's about what matters to me. And that's what I think is so beautiful.
So it is a way of modeling this to our own children if we are in a family, which would be great because you know sometimes kids can be a little bit demanding and parents say, oh, I don't have time for myself, and they are praying someone to give them time. So the answer is no one will give you time. You have to take it on your own.
Yes, because children, in my experience, they're going to take your time.
Yes,
they're going to take up space because they want to be the priority, of course. But you can show them another way, and you can show yourself another way, and it's possible.
You know, it just came to me, because I'm the mother of 2 young children, and most of the time I take time for myself. In fact, I don't take time for myself. I do things by myself, but they are not for me. So I guess kids, they just feel it, This mother of ours is just taking time without us, but not for herself. So we are just going to pull her trousers and say, come on, because what do I do when I'm alone? I go watch television, or I don't know, do the laundry, or things that are not really for myself. We are saying, oh, I'm going to walk on my own, but in fact, maybe you are going to talk to someone on the phone, or listening to music is a good way to start.
Yes, anything that can, like you gave some really good examples. There's a difference between doing things alone that nourish you and require deep presence, and doing things alone in which you're talking on the phone, or you're doing laundry, or watching a show. That's different. And when you start to notice the difference and take up space, like you're saying, like if maybe I could walk alone, but listen to music and still be present with myself, that would have a different feeling on your nervous system than walking alone and talking on the phone, because it's still distraction. And this is what I think the Honjok life shows us, is how to practice that, to notice the difference of when we are present with ourselves and when we are distracted, even while being alone. So I'm really glad you brought that up. And you're right. I believe that children know, like, hey, we're alone and we're like doing laundry. They know it.
Yes, that we are not really taking time of ourselves. They're always coming. When I'm alone, but not really alone, I'm just alone in the house and do something that it's not for myself. They just come and put a little bit more pressure. But whenever I put my earphones and listen for music, and I say I will just take some time for myself, they stay quiet. So probably without having so much knowledge, children just feel when people really need their time, and they really do it in the best way, I guess, because I'm not that good of living with my own company. I always, that's why your book was so interesting for me. And I must tell you, since I started reading your book, I decided to take those 5 minutes and see what happens. And I discovered that I'm a good company for myself. It's not that bad. So probably someday I will be friendly with myself. Now I'm just adjusting to myself, and I will see what happens next. So because I'm telling you my experience, I'm curious if you have have readers that are sharing with you, they are sending you feedback, you're receiving feedback from your readers that have already read the book, and they start telling you what happened to them.
A little bit, and particularly because of, we live in COVID times, and how they use the book to help them navigate the isolation and the feeling of hopelessness and despair, and coming to terms with feelings of loneliness. And, some of the feedback I've received is that they actually started to pursue interest with themselves that they would not have previously pursued, because they started to build and cultivate a relationship with themselves that was based on a model of curiosity, and how that started to change the direction of their lives, meaning that they started to discover who they are outside of what others expect from them. And then the pandemic kind of gave them permission to do the deeper work. And then they had some of the tools from the book and a context and a framework to begin. And it was almost like giving permission, like, this is possible. There is a way. And what better time to start when there's some form of forced isolation. So I've received some really good feedback about how it was a place to begin to discover one's own self-worth and interest, and cultivate a comfortable relationship with oneself, and be one's own best friend. I got that feedback too. It's like, I'm learning how to be my own best friend, and how to really see myself, not just the identity that I've created, but from the essence of who I am. And so that to me is the most touching, when people come back home to the remembrance of who they are without all the stories about who they think they are.
Yeah, I think it was a perfect timing, because I don't know how it happened all over the world. What I can say here in Romania, many people suffer from depression and panic attacks, anxiety, and all kind of mental health issues start coming, and people saying, "Oh, I cannot live like this. This isolation makes us crazy, and it's very, very hard for us." And most of the psychologists would say that, "Oh, it's the perfect time to start being friend with yourself and find good company of your own." But what I discovered in your book is that this gap between the theory and the action. Yes, because most of the people say you have to be the best company of yourself. Mm-hmm. And all the people are asking, okay, but how am I going to do that? Right. So your book comes and shows the practice, the tools, gives us the tools of, okay, now I decided, I got permission, as you said, because of this, the advantage of this pandemics would be, okay, we're given permission to discover and be friendly with ourselves. And fortunately, we found a book like yours that really gave us some tools, not only the theory, because, theory might be easy for practitioners, but for people, normal people who just want to know how to put it into action might be very hard. So I'm happy you got good feedback and exciting stories about from your readers. And now my last question for you: when you decided to write this book, was it because you heard about this concept, or you were just practicing this kind of lifestyle? So you were practicing and then getting to know more about it and write the book, or you start researching, write the book, and start, what was the course of this in your life?
It was because I was practicing it, working with people who struggled with loneliness and learning how to either live or be alone. And I worked with it. I would call it the tribe of one, learning how to get comfortable. It doesn't matter if you're around a sea of people, to be a tribe of one. And then in a serendipitous way, as life often is, and it was coincidental that I got approached to research the Honjok way of life. And because of my background as a psychotherapist and what I was doing in my own work. And that's how, that was back in the summer of 2019. So it was a privilege to get the opportunity to research this, to talk to the people and discover for myself and hear the voices from others of what the gifts of a Honjok way of life are. So it was a little backwards. I didn't start with studying the Honjok. I started with studying loneliness and being alone and the difference, and working with self-worth as a foundation to hold the loneliness. And these tips that you'll see in the book, like you're saying, which was such a good point, like you can't just talk about it in theory. What can people do in their daily full lives to practice building what I would call the neuronal pathways of repetition over time to make this a way of life? And so that's how I came to it, is through my practice, and also cultivating my own life and getting comfortable with solitude. I had to do my own work as well to speak to it. I had to be in my integrity. I can't just talk about it without practicing it. So I practiced the things that I talked about in the book as well. And it happened to coincide with the stories that I heard around the world and in South Korea about the gifts of solitude and living alone or being alone.
Mrs. Healey, thank you so very much for this interview. I must say your book was an inspiration for me. It is definitely a book that shows us the tools and the practice of being alone in a good way and making a good company of ourselves. I don't want to tell more, so people will take the book and get to see what's there and put it into practice. I'm so very happy you are a specialist that practices and knows very good in theory, but also in practice, the things that you are talking about. You are an inspiration in this interview as well. And hopefully, I don't know, maybe the pandemics will just go a little bit quicker so we can meet you in person as well.
I would love that.
And help us put in practice the tools that there are in your book. So I hope to see you in person next time.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really touched that you made time and reached out to interview me. And I look forward to further connection in the future.